Thank you for joining me for this mini course on small groups. Today we're talking about breaking the 30% barrier, how our groups got unstuck. Yesterday I mentioned how our church worked hard to create a quality small group experience and connect 30% of our adults into groups. Awesome! I also shared with you how our strategy limited our groups to 30%. We got stuck. Not awesome. Now, just in case you missed yesterday's video, you can actually click the tab just above and watch Connecting Your Entire Congregation, 3 Secrets to Discipling a Growing Church. Now, our recruiting method had a huge bottleneck, and as a result, there were some pretty major consequences. First of all, we failed to connect 70% of our people into groups. While we had worked very hard to get people connected into groups, the recruiting bottleneck from me personally recruiting, training, and coaching all of the leaders left our groups falling behind with a chance of never catching up. We didn't want to abandon the quality of our groups, yet we just couldn't keep up. We simply couldn't recruit enough quality leaders fast enough. We couldn't give up quality for volume, but after we recruited the low-hanging fruit, it was a tough road ahead. Since the church was growing steadily, I didn't know everybody anymore. I didn't know who had led a group before. I didn't know who was a mature believer. If I didn't know them, then I wasn't going to recruit them. So we were stuck. The second consequence was that people were still falling through the cracks. As much as we tried to offer a variety of options to our people as a stopgap, we just couldn't plug all of the holes. If a group wasn't available, then we had a couple of classes they could join or a midweek Bible study that anyone could jump into at any point. The problem was spending 4 hours at the church on Sunday morning or coming back on a Wednesday night just wasn't working anymore. No matter how much we promoted classes and Bible study, they were trending downward. We offered trendy felt need topics and childcare. At one point, we served breakfast on Sunday morning. To take the pressure off groups, I was willing to let people show up in their pajamas. Okay, maybe not. People wanted small groups, not more time in the church building. The need for quality control was killing the growth of our groups. We found a solution. We had to figure out the role quality control played in our groups. The bad news is, it's what I needed, not what the groups needed. We were limiting the opportunity for group leadership only to people and by we, I mean me, people that I knew. And the solution was, I needed to get to know more people. Okay, I was wearing a lot of hats. Who has time for that? Avoiding problems created problems. Let's face it, the only church with no problems is closed with a lock on the front door, which is a whole other problem of its own. People have problems. People create problems. Just read the Bible. Something had to change. Our third consequence was I was exhausted and discouraged. I had put a lot of effort into recruiting leaders. I had exhausted my list and myself. And while I did everything I could to continue learning from the best and brightest in small group ministry, I wasn't feeling very bright. I tried harder. I doubled my efforts. I also doubled my frustration. Was this all small groups were supposed to be? Maybe I just needed to be content with the 30% of the people that were currently connected into groups. But how could I be? So many people were still falling through the cracks. The strategies that brought us this far had fizzled out. It was time for something new. But what? If 70% of our adults had effectively said no to small groups, then what could I possibly offer them that they would say yes to? I didn't want to lose the groups that I had, but we had to try something different to start more groups. This just wasn't working. I was beating my head against a wall that I had created. Ouch. As a result, we made some tweaks to our group strategy, which produced significant growth. So here are 6 adjustments we made to launch more quality groups more quickly. First, we redefined the group experience. What was a quality group experience after all? The teaching had to be solid for sure. The environment needed to be warm and inviting. The leader should be caring. The group should be open and accepting of others. The group members needed to be supported in practically applying God's word to their lives. Change is hard. The biggest challenge was the teaching component. We just couldn't let anyone do that. But the lack of qualified teachers was obvious. And of course, the other side was that a group heavy on teaching is really a class. We could scrap teaching altogether, but then what was the point of groups really? What if the group leader could focus on being warm and inviting, open and accepting, caring and supportive? What if the teaching component happened in a different way? We decided to keep biblical teaching in our groups, but the group leader wouldn't be the teacher. Our pastor was the teacher. In some cases, this meant the group leader facilitated a discussion from a sermon-based application guide. This also opened the door to video-based curriculum where the teacher is on the video. Now the group leader could focus on things other than teaching in the group. Second, reconsider the requirements. Now, we were no longer looking for Top Gun mature Bible teachers. They were on the videos. Our focus turned to caring and supportive people who could create a warm environment. Interpretation, anyone who could make friends could lead a group with the right curriculum, the right training, the right support. The good news is we had far more loving, friendly people than we had teachers. This was a huge breakthrough. If they loved God and loved people, then they were a great candidate. Now, we needed to find out more about them, especially if we were going to advertise their groups or send people their way. We added an application and interview process to vet them. Even if we didn't know them, we were getting to know them very quickly. Oh, and every new leader had an experienced leader who I knew and trusted coaching them. Number 3, we changed the pitch man. For most of my years in ministry, I've been the number 2 man, the associate pastor, the adult discipleship pastor, the vice president, the minister of Christian education. Here's what I've learned from years of leading from the second chair. If I make exactly the same invitation as my senior pastor, I will get 30% of the result. How do I know this? For 7 years, I led the charge for small groups, and we connected 30% of our adults into groups. This wasn't a message on community on the last Sunday of the year or on Labor Day weekend. This was after 7 years. Small groups was my job. I had small groups on the brain, but I was the wrong pitchman for groups. So we made a significant change. Our senior pastor became the champion for small groups in our church. He was just as concerned about people falling through the cracks as I was. He was always in favor of groups. He just wasn't the face of groups in our church. How did I get my senior pastor to start promoting groups in a big way? Well, we put his teaching on the curriculum. While he was always in favor of groups, our new video curriculum with his teaching set his hair on fire for groups. I have to admit, the production was low quality. After all, I was the videographer. I had never produced video-based curriculum before, but my senior pastor was in, so I figured it out. Looking back, those VHS tapes were pretty embarrassing. I think most of them have been destroyed by now, or at least I hope so. But our people didn't care. They loved curriculum with our pastor on it. I'll have to tell you the rest of the story tomorrow. Number 4, change the invitation. The invitation we started with was join a small group. What we didn't tell them was that the length of commitment was, well, for the rest of their lives. They figured it out. We discovered that the rest of your life is a fairly large commitment for most people. So we shortened the commitment period. We invited people to join a group for 6 weeks. That was a much easier commitment. Our hope was by starting with 6 weeks, the groups would enjoy their experience enough to commit to the second 6 weeks of a group experience. Once they had 12 weeks under their belt, then the rest of the ministry year wasn't too much to ask. Some groups would follow a natural group life cycle and wrap things up in 18 to 24 months. Others are still going after all these years. Oh, and we stopped asking people to join groups. We spent the airtime on our weekend services recruiting leaders. And if people didn't want to lead, then they got the hint that groups were happening and people would join them. Then we just let the groups form. Number 5, support growth, don't limit growth. Our early group system was wholly dependent on me. I think that's called codependence. I had a couple of coaches helping me, but I didn't let them do very much. They might cause trouble. So I got to make a huge admission. The growth of our groups was really only limited by my own thinking. I just needed to change my thinking. That's easy, right? Okay, it's not easy. But the glaring inefficiency of our first strategy forced me to change my thinking. Now, I didn't start doing crazy things. Groups were my responsibility, and I couldn't shirk my responsibility, but I did need to loosen my grip. While I was more open to letting people I didn't know lead groups, I was unwilling to give up two things: coaching and curriculum. In the first 18 months of this strategy, every group studied the same thing together. Some of the curriculum was self-produced and some was purchased. I kept a firm hand on the teaching component. Then every new leader had an experienced leader in their life from when they said yes to leading a group and then going forward. Even if I didn't know the leader, I knew and trusted the coach. And as long as the coaches were building a relationship with the new leader, then I was good. Number 6, pray for open hearts and minds. I know some of you think prayer is a strategy. Really? We know how to pray. But here's the problem. God's work without God's power is fruitless. Whether the prayer is, Lord, help us succeed, or Lord, help us not screw up, a strategy without prayer will end up being a bunch of wasted effort. Strategy is no substitute to God working in people's hearts and minds. Well, then why don't we just pray? I would encourage that. Pray God gives you the faith for an exponential group launch, then get to work. Number 7, take calculated risks. If you're still listening to me, you're intrigued, but you might also be skeptical, and that's okay. If you're stuck and you want to try something new, then make your risk less risky. Maybe you only invite church members to lead groups. Maybe you invite anyone who's willing, but the first time out, you run a pilot, and you only start maybe 5 groups that way. We didn't start with get together with your friends and do the study. We did the host home strategy from 40 Days of Purpose, which we didn't actually use during 40 Days of Purpose, by the way. We weren't ready for it then. I was still handpicking leaders. Look before you leap. Then take whatever risk you're comfortable with. I won't push you over the edge. There is more than one way to succeed at these strategies. I hope this session has got you thinking about how your groups can become unstuck. Join me tomorrow for the second session of the mini course called 3 Secrets to Doubling Your Small Groups, and I'll see you then.